Hello, friends. We are here to talk about The Real Housewives of Atlanta, season 15, episode 12. I had to get a little Cliff's notes in before because it was just a lot of beefing last night, which I enjoyed. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, just because I feel like it was a lot of dialogue and it was a lot of things going on, and I was somewhat invested in each of the beefs because I just feel like there were some good points being made around the situations. So we're gonna definitely get into that. What did irritate me, because I enjoyed the episode, but what did irritate me was the commentary on the Twitter. But we're gonna get into that as well, and I'm trying my best not to make this video super long. So let's see what we can do. We start the episode with the aftermath of basically the Drew versus the Candy of it all. And you'll remember last episode they were having like a girls' room and the girls' night in Sheree's room, and they were talking about who's messed with a girl, which they seem to talk about every season. And Drew, hadn't admitted to it, but Candy was like, "Well, girl, you did mess with a girl, Latoya." Y'all remember, y'all were there. So they're off the aftermath of this big blow up. Candy left to go work or something like that or whatever. So she's no longer there. And what we get the next morning is Kenya linking up with Mayetta to kind of recap the situation. Marlo is with Sonya, kind of recapping the situation almost, or just kind of like kikiing. And then Sheree is with Drew. See, we're getting through it real quick, okay? But these three things are happening at the same time. And there are different things happening in each of those conversations. So most importantly, what's happening in the Mayetta and the Kenya conversation of it all, Mayetta pretty much has all the information because it seems as though she kind of like stuck around to talk to all parties involved afterwards, meaning like she had a conversation with Candy afterwards, because when Candy left the room the night before, she had gone to Kenya's room to talk about it, so she was kind of involved as well. But she was heated. She went to talk to Kenya about it because she didn't like being called a liar. Mayetta was always also around in some capacity, and basically the story behind that is that Candy, she had called whoever was involved, baby, that night. Like, she was pretty much calling everybody that was there the night that the alleged kiss happened between Drew and Latoya. And I get that. That wasn't like a big storyline or anything, but they showed it. And I just want to say, as a tourist, I get that because I don't like being called a liar either. And if I know what I saw, I'm going to call everybody that was in the room too. So that was cute for Candy. But then they get to the subject where they're really downloading the tea. I really like this conversation between Mayetta and Kenya. And Mayetta's like, girl, that's not even the half of it. So basically we find out that MARLO had recorded what was happening the night before. But not only did she record it, she sent the footage to Latoya. And basically, she sent the video to Latoya saying, why is Drew over here lying on you? And they show the screenshot of Marlo not being able to spell lying.
I videotaped her saying she wasn't and sent it to her because I'm like, what the hell? Is this girl lying?
Girl, you are so invested.
But, that's neither here nor there. That creates a big issue, right? Like, not only were you recording, but you sent this to Latoya, and then something's going to come down the line where, we already knew Mayetta was recording as well, but we're going to discuss that when we get to it. And so that's kind of like the big revelation that they get to there. Marlo sends a text message to Latoya. I guess Latoya then texted Drew. It kind of happened like all immediately within that night. Latoya texted Drew like, girl, what's going on? And Drew proceeds to call Latoya while still in the room with them. And I guess Latoya denied it or whatever. But nobody was buying it. And Marlo surmises that maybe she was paid off because she's a hustler. So she was paid off to lie. Whatever. So that's the big story there between Mayetta and Kenya. While we're with Marlo and Sonya, they're just kind of kikiing about the fact that Marlo thought that she was cool with Drew, and now things don't seem like they're good, and Drew's a liar or whatever. Not much going on there. Nothing new. We've been here all season. Episode 12, right? And then another big thing is we get to the Drew and the Sheree of it all. And basically, which I found to be harmless until I got on Twitter. It was like a harmless conversation, right? Like Sheree was kind of asking her, like, how was the night, girl? Like, the night was going well until, the tea came out and this happened and blah, blah, blah. And Drew starts expressing, just like Kenya and Marietta are talking about, she's like, I'm upset because I'm realizing, that Marlo recorded me and she sent it over to LaToya. She's giving that concern. Of course, Sheree has to throw it in there. This is where it begins to not be harmless, but I should have known better. I think Sheree had said something like, I don't know, basically like the girls had said that they, even Kenya and Candy saw, they saw it allegedly. So she's like, I guess we're trying to see what's going on with friendships. But at the end of the day, Drew identified that her issue was with Marlo, which it should have been, spoiler alert, but we're going to get to that as I said. We kind of circle back to the Marietta and the Kenya of it all, and they kind of echo what I just said. And it's just like, if you were going to have an issue with anybody, you being Drew, your issue should be with Marlo, because it's weird that she contacted LaToya, who's not even around and hasn't been around, but should be around. I'm happy I'm going to see her next episode. I keep jumping ahead, but the things are here. And, it's just, what really got weird for me was, while this is happening, Sheree proceeds to tweet. I guess she's live tweeting like the girls tweet, so that's fine. It kind of seemed like she was just finding things to tweet just for the sake of live tweeting. I don't know if there's some type of obligation there, or if it just kind of boosts the boost of it all. I don't know. But she's just tweeting, and she's like, I don't know why Drew was expressing this to me instead of to Kenya and Candy. And it's like, if you get on Twitter, you'll see, it's like, because you were having a conversation about it and you brought it up. Like, she hadn't even brought them up. She was saying that her issue was with Marlo, and then you made sure that she had an issue with everybody else just for the sake of doing it. But now you're like, well, why is she expressing it to me and not to them? You prompted her to do so, babe. Like, were you there? Is everything all right? Which I asked her on Twitter. I haven't received a response, but I'm going to assume everything's not all right, because I just don't understand that questioning. But I'm going to move forward. Did a lot of beefing on Twitter yesterday. Let me tell y'all, it's going to come up. The last key thing that happens in the conversation with Marietta and Kenya, like I said, there was a lot of tea. Marietta lets Kenya know that towards the end of the conversation, where they're kind of like bringing it down at this point, it seems like Drew had left. I don't know what happened. But whoever is left in the room, it's Courtney, Marietta, Sonia, Sheree, and Marlo. They're left in Sheree's room. And they basically, the context of the conversation isn't super clear, like how it came up, I guess is what I'm saying. But I guess the context itself is that they're talking about Drew being a liar. And it's weird, even outside of how Marietta assessed it. It's weird because it's cousin Courtney, and she's supposed to be so close with Drew, but she's in the room with them, and it seems like they're having a conversation amongst themselves outside of Marietta. It seems like Sheree, Marlo, and Sonia are having like, oh girl, this, da, 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 type of conversation about Drew being a liar. Like, they're getting that out there, venting amongst girls. And Courtney's kind of sitting in the back from what we see. Courtney's kind of sitting in the back, and Marietta's kind of sitting on the bed. And they're having that conversation amongst them. And from what Marietta assessed, she feels like it was weird because it felt like they were trying to warn Courtney about Drew being a liar or whatever, and make it like a sides thing, because there was a portion of it where Sonia said to Marlo, well, Courtney has your back. You know what I'm saying? And that's the part that's kind of out of context. I don't know where that came from, but there was a has your back type of conversation interweaved with the Drew being a liar conversation. So it's hard to interpret how it was happening. But Marietta interprets it as, they were trying to say, well, Drew doesn't have your back, Courtney, but we do, type of thing. Like, it was weird. It felt weird. It looked weird. It wasn't pieced together very well. It was all just kind of weird. And now that I'm thinking about it, whose phone recorded that? I'm sure it said. But whose phone was still recording after we just had a debacle about recording? Oh, my God. So, okay. But yeah, that happened, so that was weird, and she tells it to Kenya. We've got the breakdown of what's going on, and this is basically the opening of what's going to happen for the rest of the episode. And I'm interested in it, but I just don't feel like there's much of a debate when it comes to these topics. But, let's get into it. Okay, so the next day, the girls get together. They're about to go do this sound bath thing. I'm going to sweep right on through the sound bath because, girl, please. Like, we are not on this trip to do healing. Like, I don't know why they can't just call it a girls trip. And we know what happens on girls trips. in the Real Housewives. We actually have a new franchise now called the Real Housewives Girls Trip, and it's just like where they specifically go on a girls trip for a number of days to beef. And that's just a smaller version of what happens on these bigger seasons where they go on a girls trip for a couple of days to beef. I don't know why we gotta have themed parties. You know what I'm saying? These are not children. We don't have to have a Powerpuff Girl themed party, a Black Little Mermaid party. Like we just don't have to have those things. Like, let's just say the girls are going on a girls trip, and inevitably they're going to do a little bit of beefing. So, I'm skipping right through the sound bath. Good for them. There was a funny portion where Drew, they came up and they talked about what they envisioned or whatever the heck while they were resting, or bathing or whatever you call that activity, whatever that verb would be. And Drew says, "Oh, I was thinking about Ralph, and I envisioned Ralph like looking for me or wanting me or whatever." And it was a confessional where Marlo said, "Ralph don't want you. He wants the girl that he's in Vegas with." So that was funny. I'll give her that.
Drew, Ralph is not waiting for you. He's out in Vegas on the strip with the girl he was with, okay?
But otherwise, we're sweeping right through that. We get to the scene where basically everything comes to a head. And I guess I kind of missed this too. There was just a lot happening. There was a lot of stuff on Twitter that I'm just itching to get to. So it's really kind of right here in my head while I'm trying to assess the episode. But not many things happened in the episode worth a break of a down. So we're just going to get to where it's at. So, they leave the sound bathing, and I guess they had gone to have a little bit of a meal immediately after. They're sitting at this lunch or dinner or whatever the heck it is, and they get to the point where they talked about Sheree's healing journey and all that stuff. Y'all know, like I said, I'm skipping through that. We get to the point now where we get the Drew versus the Marlo of it all, because Sheree is kind of talking about the night and getting us back into it. And it seems like Sheree is hell-bent on making us know that the way that the conversation came up is because Candy called out Drew. It seems like maybe that was a plot that Sheree was setting up to come to us with the bullshit at the moment, just to make it seem like, oh, okay, well, this is all Candy's fault. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too much into it, but that's what it gave. And at the end of the day, as we discussed last week, the whole conversation about the whole Bolo night comes up from last time they were on the bus from Courtney when they were going to the market from last episode. That's how that comes up. And then even if we want to skip forward and talk about how it came up at the girls' night, I believe that the question about who does girl stuff came up from Sonya. So she's the one that really opened it, and Candy only acknowledged that Drew just wasn't telling the truth. So that's that. Speaking on semantics. Now they start going back and forth. Drew is immediately very upset and very vocal about the fact that Marlo recorded her. And, she's just saying, don't ever record me. It's already very just snappy, snippy. And, Marlo does her thing where she's kind of taking accountability, right? She's like, okay, yeah, I did record you and I did send it to LaToya. I did what I did, but somebody else was recording. She had to throw somebody else under the bus, which really, it has the Twitter argument itching inside of me, but I'm going to hold it. So she has to throw somebody else under the bus instead of just taking her own accountability. What has to do with Marlo? She throws somebody else into it, like her fans do on Twitter, but we'll talk about that. And she's like, well, Mayetta was recording. So Mayetta immediately jumps in and she's like, I was recording, but the difference was I was recording just as much as everybody else was. Actually, more people than Marlo and Mayetta were recording, according to Mayetta. And she's like, to my knowledge, it wasn't a big deal, right? We're all telling our true stories. We're all recording. So it's just this is a reality show. We're showing our reality. So I didn't think it was a big deal. But then when I noticed that the vibe was different and everybody was giving cameras down, we're going to be real now, she said she turned her recording off. And then aside from that, that's argument one. Argument 1A is that she didn't send any video to LaToya to be messy. And then even as we go more into it, Marlo admits that she sent the video to LaToya. She's like, because I just wanted to let LaToya know how Drew really felt about her. Okay, so you wanted to be messy. So that was that. So I'm just not understanding the difference for everybody. And I'll get to the Twitter thing now. So, that's what's kind of pissing me off, because Marlo did it and then it was echoed on Twitter, but it's always echoed on Twitter. And that's what blows me. My understanding is that the audience that watches The Real Housewives of Atlanta contains primarily adults, right? And my further analysis is that the people that tweet about this show are adults. And so when I see people tweet and say, which they do all the time, not just yesterday, when I see people tweet and say, well, Drew was calling Marlo aggressive, but Drew threatened to flip the table over. So, listen, two things can be true, absolutely. But what you're doing in making those comparisons, which you guys do for Marlo all the time, whenever Marlo does something and she's held accountable for doing it and she's called out for doing it, you always say, well, so and so does it too. Listen to the language that I'm saying. So and so does it too, right? And the way that y'all word it, it's always like you're wording it to say, well, so and so does it, so they don't have a right to say it about Marlo. But that's not true. You get what I'm saying? It's just like, just because Tom, Dick, and Harry do it does not negate the fact that Marlo does it. So, for example, Drew calling Marlo aggressive on whatever episode that was, now that Drew has done something that is aggressive, now y'all want to say, oh, well, Drew's aggressive, so she can't call Marlo aggressive. That's not true. At the end of the day, even if Drew had picked up that entire restaurant and flipped it over her head, which would be one of the most aggressive things that I've ever seen in my life, I don't know what lifestyle you guys come from, Marlo would still be aggressive. You know what I'm saying? So you can make the point that you're intending to make without making childish comparisons, is my issue, right? Like, don't make this comparison to Marlo and Drew as if it's going to negate the fact that Marlo is still aggressive. Marlo is still an aggressive person, has been aggressive this season. That fact is going to remain. Drew may have also done something aggressive. Fine. If you want to get to the point and say, hey, I feel like, Drew, you're being a hypocrite because you call Marlo aggressive and you're also being aggressive, then fine. But I also don't necessarily agree with the hypocrite argument, because the hypocrite argument would stand if she was saying, well, Marlo's the only aggressive person in the group. Nobody has ever said that. At the end of the day, her point was that Marlo is aggressive. That was it. So I just don't understand the whole comparison thing. And I feel like anytime something happens with Marlo, it always comes up. It's even coming up with Candy. Like, well, y'all see how Candy acts. This literally a key about Candy being aggressive. When people call her red hair Candy and she's activated, and like, they're not using the word aggressive, sure, but we know that Candy gets turned up. So nobody ever said that Candy has never shown aggression on that show. Candy has never shown that she's shown aggression. Never said that she hasn't shown aggression on the show. But Marlo is still aggressive. So I hate that argument. It's just very, like, sandbox to me. And I just think it's the wrong way to go about getting your point across. And I'm always going to fight against it, which you'll probably see on Twitter. Like, I get the point you're trying to make. I get the comparison that you're trying to make. I get that you're trying to say that Drew is a hypocrite, which is fine to have that point of view. But you're just going to have to say that. Like, I'm just not going to sit here and listen to y'all say, oh, well, y'all said Marlo did this, but look at what so-and-so did. It's very kiddish. Like, there are no kids here as far as I'm concerned. Just say you're a hypocrite because you've done the same thing and I don't like that you did that, and let's move on. When you're making a comparison, it seems like you're trying to diminish what Marlo did. And it makes it worse because that's what Marlo does as a person. And that's what Sheree does as a person. Like, they do, like, whenever they do stuff that's wrong on the show, it's never about just taking the accountability. It's always like, well, so-and-so does it too. We gotta grow up as a people. Like, us as a Real Housewives of Atlanta viewing people need to grow up. We really do. So I'm going to move on from that. It really doesn't go anywhere. They do a good back and forth. I feel like Drew got some good reads in on Marlo as it pertains to the hair follicle thing. I know that people also feel strongly about, like, bringing up Marlo's criminal past, and it's like, oh, that's low-hanging fruit and that's a lazy read, da da da. it still affects Marlo. And I don't know if you guys know what reads are and how arguments work, but you say things in an argument, they're going to hit the other person, they're going to affect them. Those points still clearly affect Marlo. I'm not saying that it's right to say, but if you're having an argument with somebody and you're trying to read them, you're trying to get a read off, a successful read is going to be something that's going to affect, it's going to sting that person. And so long as that argument about Marlo's criminal past stings her, then it's always going to be a read, whether you guys like it or not. So I feel like we should just go ahead and agree that Drew was reading Marlo, and y'all are going to have to get over that. So that was that. Speaking of reads, though, since we're having a Sesame Street lesson, I'm trying to get you guys to understand some things. So the Courtney and the Kenya, there was a lot of chatter that Courtney ate Kenya up, or like gagged Kenya, or like read Kenya. Like, I just saw none of that. What I will say is she definitely held her own. Period. That's all I got to say. You know, she wasn't doing any stuttering like Sonya was doing in Jamaica last year when she tried to come for Kenya. Like, she definitely held her own. What she was saying, not reads. Like, for you to be like, well, literally all she was saying was you slipped and fell because you're a mean girl. That's not a read. It's just not. So I don't know where that assessment comes from, but it's inaccurate in my book. And like I said, she held her own, so I'll give her points for that. Snaps for Courtney, but it wasn't that at the end of the day. And Kenya wasn't giving her anything back. So I don't know if maybe y'all thought because Kenya was paying her dust, basically, y'all were like, oh, Kenya's stumped. She has nothing to say. She's gagged. I'm just kind of lost. Like, it's kind of hard for me to give. I don't want to generalize because I know everybody doesn't think this way. But I've been reading it for a long time. Like, I've been reading it since yesterday. These weird views on what happened on this episode. So I apologize if the review is a little skewed, but these are just things I had to address. And I mean, they're relevant to the episode, so I get it. But yeah, that happened. You know, they're basically having this argument because, you know, Kenya brought it up. She's like, well, what Kenya was trying to get to, and I'm glad she brought this up like later. She's like, Courtney's trying to get into it with me, and I wasn't even trying to read Courtney. It wasn't a Courtney read. What I was trying to get out was the fact that the night before, they were having this meeting, Sonya, Sheree, and Marlo, and they were trying to basically get Courtney to go against Drew. So that's all she was trying to get out. So she was just asking her, like, did you have anything you wanted to say to Drew? And Drew even acknowledged early in the episode, like, Courtney's acting weird towards me. So it was more than relevant. And Courtney's immediately turned up at Kenya, and it becomes this whole like you're a mean girl thing, so that's why you have slips and falls. That just sounds so silly to me. So, but whatever, if y'all lived, then great, go off. So that conversation's happening, and then there's also this debate of like, well, or the girls are saying like, well, Kenya wasn't even there, and it's like, so, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, she wasn't arguing a point. Like, if she had been arguing a point or trying to prove something, then I would see it. But she was just literally trying to bring it up to get the discussion. And when she brought it up, Courtney kind of backed down on what she was saying and wasn't trying to say anything. So that's when Kenya proceeded to say, well, Drew, they were talking about you. And Courtney was just upset. So, I mean, I think we should kind of dissect that a little bit more. That's why I just did it. So that's what happened with that. I'm going to move on. We get like this thing where it's just like Sheree against everybody, and she's upset, and she's like, y'all are not going along with my fake healing journey. I'm going to get up and leave. I'm over it. And, you know, that didn't move me too much. I think the biggest thing from this was the word collusion, the use from Magneta. And I've already said, I feel like some of the interaction and dialogue from Magneta can be weird, but I understand completely, like, the delivery is weird. But I understand completely what she meant by collusion. I don't think it was a huge deal. I don't know why we were dissecting it so much. Like, she even said in her confessional, it wasn't like the dictionary, you know, use of the word collusion. Like, she was just using it in banter. Like, girl, it was a collusion. It was a scheme set up by Sheree, Marlo, and Sonya. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's all that she was saying. It was a collusion. It's just a word. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know why the girls are in such an uproar about that. But not a lot of people knew what it meant. I didn't even fully know what it meant. I had to go look it up myself. So Real Housewives of Atlanta is an educational program as well. So, that happened. I didn't think that that was a big deal either. I want to say though, like I think it was weird that Sonya was so upset about it. Like she was very vocally just like, "Oh my God, don't use the word collusion." Da 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 da. But she was one of the more from the little clip that we saw. She was one of the most vocal in the room, where she's just like, she's the one that brought up had your back. Like, oh, well, Courtney had your back. Da da da. So it's like, girl, you were like kind of at the head of that conversation where it seemed like you were swaying Courtney one way or another, and now you don't want Manietta to use the word collusion like it's such a big deal. So that's weird. And even in that, like Marlo tweeted, like I don't know about like her read. I don't know about a collusion, but I know delusion. Like I'm not the one that brought up the kissing thing, and it's like neither one of those things have anything to do with each other. Like they're kind of mutually exclusive, and it's weird that you would bring that up because your homegirl is the one that brought it up. Sonya is the one that brought up the kissing thing. So that was weird as well. Like it was just a lot. And for the rest of the episode, basically, it just became a back and forth of like who's the worst, like who's, and I didn't see much of this debate on Twitter, maybe because there was so much else going on, but on the episode definitely it was much more of a debate of like, well, who's more wrong, Mayetta or Marlo. And we've already covered it. Mike Mayetta said in her confessional. I don't know if it requires much explanation, but if it went over anybody's head, it was more wrong that Marlo was, let me say how Mayetta said it because she was completely right. There's no difference in the two of them recording. The difference is that Mayetta didn't send it to Latoya to be messy. Marlo did, admittedly, send it to Latoya to be messy at the end of the day. So I'm not understanding why there's this discourse between that and why they don't understand there's like what the issue is. And then like the last issue that I'm not understanding why there's like no connection is the fact that, obviously when Marlo got into it with Drew, she brings up Ralph and she's like saying these like snarky things about Ralph, like, oh, he works in tech, da da da. She's being facetious, obviously. And even Sheree gets on her confessional and she's like, I don't understand what the issue is. Like if Ralph works in tech, then why does Drew have an issue with that? And I had to ask myself again yesterday, is everything all right with Sheree? Or is she just like definitely defending Marlo at all costs? But like honestly, is everything all right? Because Marlo is being facetious. Like you have to have known. There's no way that you didn't know that she was being facetious, right? And bringing up Ralph, right? So I'm not even going to dig too much more into that at the end of the day because Marlo already said that she shouldn't have brought up Ralph. How I feel about Ralph texting Marlo, it's cringy. It's very weird. I don't really live for Ralph, so it's not like I have very positive things to say about him. I don't even think he's so fine as y'all think he is. Like, I really don't have much of a good grade to give Ralph at all. So I don't have any defense for him. But again, I actually didn't see much debate about that on Twitter either. I think it's cringy at the end of the day is what I'll say. I like that Marlo was able to kind of apologize to Drew for it. Again, she kind of like takes accountability but then throws a wrench into it. So she kind of took accountability. She's like, I shouldn't have brought him up. So, okay, fine. But I mean, her and Drew aren't going to get past it. Everybody starts beefing again when they're having that conversation. And King is just like, girl, let's just shut it down. Like, it is what it is. So the girls didn't heal from anything at the end of the day on this fake healing trip. Go figure. You know what I'm saying? And then Twitter was even a disaster. And I think, there was even more of a discussion. Like, it just was a lot of beef. Like, everything yesterday was just about beef. It was so little about the episode. And then you even got Kenya all over Twitter kind of like calling out production, which I liked, or more, I would say more so acknowledging, because we were calling out production, because there was that weird moment where did the aggression word come up with Kenya as well? It was something that Courtney was saying about her being aggressive or being a mean girl or being a monster or whatever. And production proceeds to show clips of her reacting. It's the same thing that happened a couple episodes ago, reacting to the other ladies doing stuff. More notably, Marlo kicking on her door and her screaming in response. So that was so weird. It was a lot of Twitter call out about that yesterday. And Kenya was calling it out too, like she was acknowledging it. So I enjoyed that as well. There were several tweets about it. at the end of the day, all I can take from this episode, there were tons of beefs. There is there's a disconnect. There's a mental disconnect on Twitter, and we've always all known that, but yesterday showed me a lot. It really did. For the cast members and for others, for the viewers. But the positives, I enjoyed the episode. And Sonya held Marlo accountable. She did tell Marlo she shouldn't have done the Latoya thing. And next week we're going to see Latoya and Cynthia. But, Marlo's still Marlo. Sonya's still Sonya. Sheree's still Sheree. Drew is still lying, allegedly. And y'all think Courtney read Kenya, which is just so. I'm very turned off by everything. Besides the episode, I enjoyed the episode. Honestly, Twitter ruined it for me. So that's where I'm at with it. But, that was the episode. Let me know what y'all think. Honestly, I hope that I can get some more. Let's get some hope in the comments. Let's join hands in the comment section and let's provide each other with some hope for the mental capacity of the RHOA viewers. I'm going to see y'all next week.